Okay, so let's finish up our West Side Story recap. So, a couple of weird facts about the movie version of West Side Story is the Sharks and the Jets were not allowed to meet each other while they were rehearsing um, to give an authentic feel between the two gangs. Didn't work out very well because, in fact, one of the Jets marries one of the Sharks after the movie had been produced, and they have a child. The choreographer, to get a background of the feel of Puerto Rican um music, goes to a predominantly Puerto Rican high school in New York City, where he observes a dance. They had a dance celebration, and he was really surprised at the dance movements and the music and all of that sort of thing, which he incorporated eventually into the movie. Okay, so poet Cynthia Zarin recalled in the New Yorker recently. She quotes, "From West Side Story, I learned about tragedy and love. There were broken hearts all over the place, like broken glass. And the idea that things can go very, very wrong in an instant, but that the most important thing in the world was that we all learned to get along. Over 60 years later, and 100 years since the legend that is Leonard Bernstein, was born, I can't help but feel it is our collective human tragedy that we still have not learned how to do that." And that's basically the bottom line and the moral of our of the movie and the theatrical production and the book. Okay, so spoiler alert. We're going to go right to the final scene in the theatrical production and the movie, and it goes like this. So the Jets and the Sharks appear on the street. Maria has just found out that her Romeo counterpart uh, has been shot and killed by Chino of the Sharks gang. So Maria picks up the gun and points it at all of them, both the Jets and the Sharks, and asks Chino if there were enough bullets to kill everyone and herself. Okay, so the depths of her sadness and anger move everyone as she breaks down over Tony's body. Officers Krupp and Schrank arrive. They stand with Doc, watching as two boys from each gang pick up Tony's body and form a professional. The rest follow the professional, with Baby John picking up Maria's shawl, giving it to her, and helping her up. As Maria follows the others, the adults continue to bear silent witness. So, this is the paradox of the story. And the major paradox in West Side Story is that only through hate, death, and violence are the gangs able to find peace and reconciliation. The final scene shows the two gangs finally able to come together after Chino shoots Tony in the playground. Okay, so that's basically our quick little wrap up of West Side Story. I hope you were able to skim through it. Take a look at how the text is totally different from prose. Okay, we'll move on to our next slide now. So our next slide talks about a photographer, uh, Bruce Davidson, and he connects with a social worker in New York City. And this is in 1959, not a couple years after West Side Story movie has been produced. And he connects with a gang in Brooklyn called the Jokers. And he does a photo essay. He stays with them for several months and photographs their daily activities. So this is basically a photo essay piece on the gangs of New York. There is a link in our email to take a look at this. So take a few minutes and go through the photos. It gives a pretty good background of actual gangs in New York City at the time of our movie West Side Story. So one of the criticisms of the story, the theatrical and the movie portion, by Viviana Vargas, who is Puerto Rican, and she talks about something called cultural appropriation. So this is she writes a criticism about the story, and this is what she says. Um, while in graduate school this past spring, I engaged in a research paper project on people of color in 1950s New York City theater scene, states Viviana Vargas. In the 1950s New York City, the Puerto Rican community experienced an arts and cultural appropriation that has continued to shape the way many people view Puerto Rican migrants and descendants in the United States. The culprit, the popular Shakespearean-inspired musical West Side Story. White male creators, Robbins, Bernstein, Sondheim, and Lawrence, were unsurprisingly unable to truly represent the Puerto Rican U.S. American story, that is the migration to New York City from rural areas in Puerto Rico. Instead, the Puerto Rican story these creators presented was that of gang violence and whitewashed casting. So the story of the migration goes something like this. Um, we talked about this earlier. America takes possession of Puerto Rico after the Spanish-American War. Some time goes by. Some industrialists go down to Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico at the time was serious poverty situation. They had geared all of their agriculture for the production of sugarcane. So their whole rural farming enterprise was based totally on sugarcane, which was not really needed. So the industrialists decided to buy up these big tracts of farmland with the proposal to build factories for making textiles, and which they did. So the population, the rural population in Puerto Rico, really had no job skills to work in those factories. So They left Puerto Rico, mostly settling in New York City. And again, they run into racial discrimination, economic hardship, poverty. Now, what she says was that the kids growing up in rural Puerto Rico had many eyes on them. You knew your neighbor, everybody watched out for everybody. If the young girl is kissing a boy on a park bench in rural Puerto Rico, some parent sees it as somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I saw your daughter kissing a boy." And then the father gets all upset and kind of, so everybody's working together to keep the kids in line. Well, that those watchful eyes were gone in New York City. You didn't know your neighbors as well. Economic hardship, a lot of social problems led to these gangs being formed. Now, kids would join gangs for many reasons. Socioeconomics was one. Another would be if the family is broken, the gang becomes the new family. Uh, Food, clothing, and shelter in a poverty situation. You might join a gang to make money, and illegally, but you are making some money. So these are some of the factors that she talks about in her criticism of cultural appropriation uh, in from Viviana Vargas's West Side Story critique.